This plan isn't perfect, but it's a strong bill, and it is a worthy solution. Only a bipartisan bill will become law.
The agreement reached today is one that'll help enforce our borders, but equally importantly, it'll treat people with respect.
What that means is that while the administration and the other sponsors of this bill say it is not an amnesty bill, it will allow illegal immigrants now in this country to stay and work. There are stepped-up border enforcement provisions in it as well. We'll talk about more of that in a moment, but let me introduce Fred Barnes, executive editor of the Weekly Standard, Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and the syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer, Fox News contributors all. Fred, what are the key elements here in your view?
Well, it is a comprehensive bill, and the three parts are, of course, border security, and then the temporary worker program, and then dealing with the 12 million illegal immigrants already here.
Now, the temporary worker program is for people who haven't yet come here, right?
Yeah, sure. But I'll get to that. This won't take that long. I mean, the border security has with it a trigger. In other words, unless certain things are done, like having 18,000, I think it's 18,000 more border patrolmen there and 370 miles of fence, until that is done, you can't move on to stages 2 and 3. But once that's done, then you can have a program of bringing in 400,000 temporary workers a year who can stay 2 years, but no longer. Then they have to go back and stay in their country a year if they want to come back again. And they can, but they're not allowed to stay here and get on a path to citizenship. And then thirdly, and of course the most controversial part, is the 12 million illegal immigrants already here. They will qualify after the trigger and so on.
I mean, after the border enforcement provisions are in place,
they will qualify for a card that will allow them to stay here if they meet the qualifications. You know, they have a clean criminal record,
and they have to pay a fine,
and they have to pay a fine. But if they want to, after 8 years, if they want to get a green card and get on the path to citizenship, they have to return to their home country, only briefly. I think they're guaranteed to return. The heads of household do. And then they can get in line to be a citizen of the United States, which would happen, I think, like something after about 13 years.
It would appear this bill can pass the Senate.
Yeah,
but what about the House, Mara?
That's a big question. Already, some House Republicans are saying this still is amnesty to them. Look, I think this was surprising to me that it got that far, even in the midst of a presidential election year. You still have Ted Kennedy and the president working together to come up with this. I think the two key things about this bill are the touchback provision, which Fred just described, that you do have to go home to apply, and I think that is politically very important to get Republicans on board. It's kind of maybe satisfied some of this cry for deportation that you have among certain Republican circles, and also the fact that this does have the triggers in it. The triggers and the touchbacks are the two most important things.
I mean, the enforcement
first,
which are triggers for the Charles.
Well, I'm unimpressed by the touchback. It's like tagging up at third base. I think all that has to happen is the head of household heads home. He spends a while there. He returns. He's guaranteed a return, and the whole process proceeds. Look, this is clearly amnesty.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Let me argue that point with you just for a moment. Just the definition of amnesty is a mass pardon. And a pardon is defined, I looked this up today, as you're excused without penalty. Now, there are penalties in here.
Look, the penalty for illegal immigration in America, the important one is deportation. It's not a fine. Deportation is your penalty. Well, under this bill, as soon as the triggers are triggered, everybody shows up at the INS and gets a Z visa.
That's what it's called. That's the new
visa. Which
it's not a green card, but it's a kind of a visa that lets you stay here.
It's a green card. That's my point. You're here. You're legal. You're going to, as Kennedy has said, you'll sleep well at night and your family because you're now here legally, indefinitely, and you can work. So, and it's renewable indefinitely. So, in essence,
don't you have to put the enforcement provisions in place on the border first?
Look, that is the supposed trigger, and that's what I think is in doubt. If the enforcement is serious, I'm in favor of this because I believe in amnesty after you shut the border. But I have to be shown that this is serious stuff. Doubling the number of agents is bureaucratic stuff that's meaningless. If you get a reduction of the people who cross the border illegally by, say, 90%, that's a trigger. You build a fence and you do that, I'd be all in favor of amnesty for the 12 million already here.
What's in the bill,
I think then you're going to be in favor of it because they have to have this biometric card that is foolproof that anybody will have to get a job. If you don't have it, you're not going to...
Charles was talking about reducing illegal immigration as a trigger.
The number of people who cross here, I want to see
Well, I
that
assume
happen.
it will.
And not bureaucratic benchmarks.
Yeah, well, I don't, look,
you're assuming it is. I'm
370
not
miles of
assuming
fence
anything.
is not a bureaucratic benchmark. I agree with you on border guards.
And a border that's 2,000 miles long, it's meaningless, 300 miles.
But here's
it allows 1,700 others of places in which you can enter.
Here's the problem I have with what you said, Charles, is, and this bill accepts one thing, and you don't seem to accept it, and that is that the 12 million people who are here illegally aren't going back. America's not going to deport them. There is no Republican administration that's going to do that. There is no Democratic administration that's going to do that. They're here. So we got to deal with them. And what's the best way to deal with them? Well, we want them to work. We want them to come out of hiding. We want to give them a card so we'll know who's at least here and who's not. And we want them ultimately, because most of them, I think most of them came here because they want to be in America and would like to be citizens, to give them a chance after paying a penalty, and they get there in 13 years, Charles. That is not amnesty.
13 years to get citizenship is fine, but the point is that on day one, you don't need a green card if you have a Z visa. Yeah. You are here legally. Look, I'm not against this. I'm in favor of this, but only after you shut the border. And you've got to show me that this actually is going to do that. I think it's got a lot of loopholes. It will be waived. The president will say all of this is done, and yet the borders will remain open.
In the House, they're expected to add a provision which will specify that until Fred Barnes can satisfy Charles Krauthammer that the border provisions have truly been accelerated, there'll be no bill. Next